Give me the chance.
Well, it's good to see each one of you tonight. I don't know, Brother Henry, are we ready to go? All right, Henry says we're ready. But just before we go, I'd like to do a couple of things. My brother Kevin Doe is with us tonight with his wife, and I don't remember your name.
Denise.
Denise?
Yes.
Well, just want to welcome you both tonight. And I don't know, you may know some of our folk, but I won't take time to introduce everyone. You were looking at the back of their heads anyway, and you might not remember all of them. But it's good to be together tonight. And I did want to tell you one other thing, that this week I have written the introduction to my next book.
What's it about?
And I have written the first page of chapter 1. What is it about? It's on Daniel. And I'll present those things that we're all familiar with, but the book will deal to a large degree with chapter 8 and onward. But it will be a complete presentation of the whole book. But in chapters 2, and the historical chapters, of course, are not, won't call for a great deal of commentary, but chapters 2 and 7 will present them as the base. At any rate, it's been a year and a half since I finished my last book, and I'm just now getting started with another one. I have been debating between 3 books. I thought for sure I was going to write a theological autobiography for some time, but then Romans seemed to demand attention. So I shifted my focus to Romans. And after a bit, Daniel kept pressing in. And because I will likely be teaching Daniel our next term, I decided this might be good to work on this while I'm teaching. That'll give it a little added impetus and be a benefit on both sides. After I finish Daniel and probably Romans, I do want to present Revelation, chapter on Revelation, a book on Revelation. But at any rate, that's where I am now. And those books, the parts of books which I've had in the archives for a long time, stay right there because there are too many things. In fact, there are other things besides the ones I mentioned that keep somebody every now and then urges me to write on, or that I think about. So whether they'll ever get finished or not, I don't know. But there's one book that it's not at all complete, but it was pretty well finished, but not refined. Was on the 1901 issues with a focus on Jones and his claims that are still amongst us today, that we rejected the reorganization, and of course he went out of the faith. A significant part of that was because of his acquirement of the false concept of the Plymouth Brethren, that there should be no organization. But that is not God's plan. It never has been, never will be. God is a God of law and order. And God has given careful instructions regarding the organization of his work and his people. Well, tonight we're going to begin chapter 18 for the sake of Brother Kevin and his wife. I think your wife was with us last time, but we're going through Revelation. We've gotten as far as chapter 18, and would like to make a few preliminary comments regarding the background. We are about to repeat the second angel's message. Remember it said with a loud cry, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. Well, we're about to repeat that here in chapter 18. But there is a passage I want to call to your attention before we start that is in the Old Testament. You'll find it in Isaiah 61. I opened to chapter 60, and that gets pretty close. Isaiah 61. That text, I don't know if I've ever shared with you the story that goes with that, but it'll take too long to share tonight. But I enjoy sharing the story of this text. How the Lord, when I was in my earliest ministry, wouldn't allow me to prepare a sermon. It's the one sermon I did prepare long beforehand, and it just dried up on me. I knew I couldn't preach it because it didn't touch my heart anymore. So I tried another outline, and I tried all week. I would get an outline started, and it would seem to be going somewhere, and it would dry up. And finally, the Lord impressed me that He didn't want me to prepare a sermon. And I preached on Isaiah 61. That was the text He gave me. And it was a miraculous circumstance, which I don't take time tonight. But it says, and by the way, this is the first sermon this is the text of the first sermon I preached in every church afterward for a long time. Because I believe it is the message for today. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me, I'm sorry. I said 61, it is 60, and that's what I opened to. It is 60. I realized when I started reading that was not the text. It is an excellent text. It was a text that Jesus read in Nazareth when He began preaching. But no, chapter 60 is where I wanted you to go. I'm not sure why I said 61. But anyway, rise, shine, the first verse. For thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Now, what is the glory of the Lord?
His character.
His character. The glory of the Lord is risen upon thee, for behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and His glory shall be seen, where? Upon thee. And Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Someday, even if I have shared that with you before, I'm sure the audience changes. I may share that again someday, the tremendous story that goes with that. But we turn now to chapter 18 of Revelation 18. Yes. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven with great power, and the earth was what? Lightened with His glory. It speaks about the same glory that Isaiah is speaking about. And where is His glory to be seen? Upon His people. And why? Because their characters reflect His character. And the first angel's message says, fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come. Now, there's no way for us to give glory to God our own glory is nothing. But we can give him glory by reflecting his character. And that is the only way. Now, I wanted to begin with that because it's very important to understand. We've been, for chapter after chapter, we've been dealing with the judgment of God and the 7 last plagues and so forth. Now we're coming to the last full chapter that deals really with the plagues. But before that chapter, it shows the glory of God. And we can understand through comparing it with Isaiah and so forth that this glory that fills the earth is because his people now reflect his character. Amen. Wanted to comment furthermore that we're going to be reading about the loud cry in just a moment. And the message God gave Wagner and Jones that was proclaimed at Minneapolis was Ellen White called the loud cry message. It was resisted, and we failed to realize the latter rain which was to come as a result of the loud cry. Tonight, our challenge must be to apply these principles to ourselves, because we're now at the time when God is waiting for his people to reveal his character so that he can complete the conflict between good and evil and can return to take his people. So we'll turn back again to the first verse. After these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. Now, in our study of the 3 angels' messages, where it says first angel, second angel, and third angel, we identified the first angel's message with the proclamation of the church. The angels present to the church a message. It goes through the church. God does not proclaim his message in this world independent of his people, who are the apple of his eye, no matter how many blemishes that apple has. It's still the apple of his eye. And God is intending and will cleanse his church. The question is, who will be remaining? We know that there will be a great sifting time, shaking time. And we can understand from the Bible and spirit of prophecy that the majority will be shaken out. But those who are faithful, those who are prepared to reveal the character of God will remain. And the only ones who remain are those who are sealed with the seal of the living God in the forehead. And the seal is the name of the Father and the name of New Jerusalem and so forth. But that name is a symbol of his character, and the forehead is a symbol of the mind. God's mind, stamped in our very characters, is to be revealed to the world. So it says the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Is showing the corruption of Babylon. And for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Actually, this chapter is a chapter proclaiming what response the merchants will have at the fall of Babylon. Then we hear verse 4, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of sins and receive not of her plagues. Now we've been dealing with the plagues for several chapters, and they are very serious. The wrath of God is filled up in the 7 last plagues. And God does not want any of his children to have to suffer the plagues. And so he calls out, and we are the ones whose mouths and whose pens and so forth are to be used to call out of Babylon all of God's people. And now what is Babylon? What constitutes Babylon? It says that Babylon will be divided and fall into 3 parts. What are those parts? Well, chapter 16 makes it very clear. About chapter 16 says that the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So basically, it's a world confederation against the God, the Creator, the God of heaven. So our message then has to go to the whole world. And Jesus said, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world, and then shall the end come." But you see, to proclaim it with the power of the loud cry requires that we understand and internalize the Minneapolis message, which is a message focused on Christ, our righteousness. Now, when we think of Babylon, we think of its corruption. But we must understand that that same corruption lies within us. However latent it may be, our natures are the same as their natures, self-centered. And therefore, to come out of Babylon requires that we come out of selfishness and pride. Now, selfishness and pride are so deeply embedded in our very beings that we don't even realize the self-centeredness. And as God shows this to us, we need to rejoice. Actually, it hurts to face the uncleanness. And we will instinctively, Laodicea has instinctively turned away from that. Therefore, it says, "You think you're rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing. You do not know that you're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked." Now, there has to be a reason why we're in such miserable condition and not recognize it. It's because of denial. Now, anyone who has studied psychology knows there's such a thing as denial. And we as a people are in a state of denial. In order to understand the wonderful nature of Christ, our righteousness, we must understand the seriousness of our own uncleanness, so that we are aware that there's no way. In fact, we have to gain victory through our failure, because it's our failure that announces to us our own corruption. Now, God doesn't want us to fail, but He doesn't want us to be lost. And He would rather we would fail and recognize our need and plead for help than for us to go on in a Laodicean condition. Now, today we have within the church evidence of corporate failures around the board, many of them. But what God intends is not that we feel judgmental of those who are so displeasing to God and who are dishonoring His name in various ways, but that we recognize that we are subject to the same internal corruption that the others have. And while we call people out of formal Babylon, we must call our own people out of spiritual Babylon, which is self-centeredness. Our only hope of getting out of this world alive is in facing the reality of our corruption and claiming Christ's righteousness, which is he is eagerly seeking for us to acquire, which will not only suffice to provide God the opportunity of defending us in judgment, because we're judged by his righteousness, not by our uncleanness, but also the reception of Christ's righteousness is a personal experience that permits us to reveal his character. And it is by learning to recognize our uncleanness and reject it consistently and continually, and claim Christ's righteousness that permits him to reveal himself in us. It is God that works in you both to will and to do, Paul says in Philippians, to do of his good pleasure. So the calling out of Babylon is going to be effective only when we have come out of Babylon. We have come out of formal Babylon. Some of us, most of us probably have never been in formal Babylon. We've been in God's own church. I was born of parents who belonged to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So I've never been a part of formal Babylon. But I have had to come out and must continue to remain out of spiritual Babylon, which is selfishness. And there is no way for me to deny the reality of my selfishness. I must confess it continually before God and ask for victory over it, so that I can have come out of Babylon by asking God for that. But I must continually ask him for the help, or I'll be right back where I started from, because my own nature is still selfish. If I do not live on that level, it's a miracle. It's a daily miracle. And it's only because of what Paul says, it's God that works in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure, to reveal his character. That's what God's great desire is. So the message then for tonight is verses 1 and 4. Verses 2 and 3 declare the corruption of Babylon. But we must understand that corruption in a spiritual sense and make sure by God's grace that we acknowledge our uncleanness and claim his cleansing. And then it says, for her sins have reached into heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you. Double unto her double according to her works. In the cup, see, we're still dealing with the plagues. In the cup which she has filled her double. And the second angel's message announces this cup. And so does verse 4. How much she has glorified herself and lived it. Notice how much she has glorified who? Herself. Self-centeredness. And lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she has said in her heart, I sit as a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, and mourning, and famine. And she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. Now, the fact is, it says her plagues come in what? One day. Now, does that represent a prophetic day? Would that be 1 year? I don't think so. There's a reason why. Because chapter 17 has said that her plagues will come in 1 hour. And we will find yet in chapter 18 that it comes in 1 hour. Now, when it says 1 day, that's no contradiction to 1 hour, because 1 hour is a part of 1 day. But I believe that God has allowed his prophet John to mention both a day and an hour to help us to realize that he's not intending this to be mathematically configured. In 1 hour, if we were to figure that one, would be about just about 2 weeks. But there's no basis upon which to do it when it declares 1 day in one case, 1 hour in another. And then it says, the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Now, how long does it say the judgment is here?
1 hour.
1 hour. And the merchants of the earth. By the way, before I speak of the merchants, notice we've been talking about the kings of the earth. What chapter 8 does is to announce the loud cry and the call out of Babylon, the final call out of Babylon, and portray the wickedness of Babylon. Then it immediately turns to show its impact on the society she has subverted. It is mentioned before that she seduced the kings of the earth, and because they readily accepted that seduction, they too will be reap the results. But they will cry aloud at the impact of her fall, which will deprive them of their power. In the very end, when God judges Babylon, his judgment will be on all who connect with Babylon, which are the kings of the earth. Then he turns to the merchants. There are two groups of people who have especially entered into conspiracy with her, or entered into what is called illicit relations with her, are the kings of the earth who have enforced whatever her judgments have been. And this is the case of the papacy through the centuries. It was not the papacy that killed the people, it was the kings of the earth. Because she used the military power of the state to enforce her decrees. And the same will be true in the final climax. The church on one hand and the state on the other will be united in this image of the beast. The beast is a papacy, and an image is a replica. And that replica is a union of church and state. And that's what makes the papacy what it is. That it is the union of an unfaithful state to an unfaithful church, who uses the state to enforce her decrees, which are in violation of God's decrees. So we go back to the merchants in verse 11. Merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buys her merchandise anymore. There will be an economic collapse, a worldwide collapse, and by the way, we can see it coming. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of the most precious wood and brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour, wheat and beasts and sheep, horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. Notice, and the souls of men. Now, what institution on earth do these very characteristics remind us of? The papal cathedrals and the dress and the ornaments of the papal hierarchy. While the people are in dire poverty, in the most bitter distress, the church lies in luxury. And gold and silver and precious stones, but also purple and ivory. And all of these things, these are symbolic of the papacy. Then it says, and the merchants of these things, which were made rich by her. Now, as long as the papacy continued, the merchants were happy because they got their cut on everything. Now they stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster, and all the company in ships and sailors, as many as trade by sea, stood afar off. So the merchants and the shipmasters, really shipmasters are merchants, and they cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is likened to the great city? And they cast dust. And by the way, the papacy is the greatest institution ever developed on earth. And when the papacy falls, it will be a calamity, an economic calamity for the whole world. And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea, by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, cast it into the sea, saying thus, with violence shall the great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found in no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. No craftsman, and whatsoever craft it be, shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of the candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. We'd like to comment the fact that in the Old Testament, the same judgment is pronounced against the city of Babylon. Now that has become true, and although the Iraqi government, if I remember right, determined they were going to resurrect the city of Babylon here a number of years ago, it's never happened. The fact is that God declared that ancient Babylon, the city, would become the habitation of jackals and wild animals that would never be rebuilt. Now, that then becomes a type of the Babylon that John is talking about, because that was true when John was writing. So he can't be talking about the fall of ancient Babylon. He has to be talking about the mystic Babylon, the formation of the three, that it talks about a little earlier, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So that is yet to happen, and it will happen according to the very type of ancient Babylon. It will happen to spiritual Babylon. Now, the important thing as we sum up the message tonight is to consider that the prophecies of God will take place. We do face the confederation that has not yet been formed that will be destroyed before Christ comes, in which confederation we will be denied food, we will be denied any chance to buy or sell, and ultimately under the final death decree where everyone who does not worship the beast or his image is killed. However, God portrays this to us ahead of time with the knowledge that instead of our being killed, the plagues fall upon mystical Babylon, which comprises the great men of the whole earth. And the plagues of God will be so great that I am sure, although they will charge the faithful with those plagues, they'll probably give plenty of opportunity for them to be concerned about their own desperate situation. But before that date comes, that hour set for the extermination of God's people, Babylon itself will fall, and the deception of Satan will be exposed. And so it says in chapter 16, I think it is, that they will burn her with fire. And we talk about her burning here. So the very kings, the 10 kings that are talked about in 17, who provide her support for 1 hour, it says, will turn against her, and they're the ones, by the way, it's in 17, who burn her with fire. Now, how literal that is and how much that is symbolic, I don't know. But the fact is that vast destruction is foretold. And meanwhile, God's people are protected. So we need not face the final hour with fear. The interesting thing is that God, who gave the 3 Hebrews courage and then allowed them to be thrown into the fiery furnace, but prevented them from having even singed hair, will be caring for us. So our whole focus should not be on worrying about the future, wondering. And as far as can we stand? No, not in our own strength. But yes, if we claim the righteousness of Christ, He will give us Himself, because you cannot disconnect Christ's righteousness from Himself. He was the righteous one. And when we receive the righteousness of Christ, it is because we receive Him, and He will protect us during this final crisis. Well, may God bless each one. We're going to have one more chapter that will actually complete the plagues scenario, but it won't be saying much about the plagues because the focus is going to be on Christ's victory. Amen. Chapter 19 for next week. Shall we stand? Father, we thank you for your loving kindness. We thank you for telling us ahead of time of the devil's wiles, his plans, and of your plans, and assuring us that instead of him being triumphant, which he appears to be, there will be sudden destruction, and your people will be protected and cared for. We ask this in the name of Jesus, amen. Let me just say again that all those chapters dealing with the plagues focus on the destruction of satanic forces, Satan's kingdom. Chapter 19 shifts the focus to the victorious Christ, but it's still part of the same scenario.